Yeah, here the focus is more on the understanding of the spreads, the various definitions associated with the spread. Because initially we have defined spread as the difference between the bonds YTM or the bonds yield minus the treasury security or risk free rate of return, treasury bonds YTM. This difference is what we call as yield spread. And we have also defined that the wider is the spread, the higher is the credit risk. And the narrower the spread is, the lesser is the credit risk. So that is the reason we need to understand this concept of yield spread. So before that, we need to understand, see, as a government or as a reserve bank or as a federal bank, what the federal bank actually plays around with the interest rates, right? It either increases the interest rates or decreases the interest rates. It plays the central bank, the federal bank is majorly responsible for the changes in the interest rates in the country. So what are the mechanisms that it uses for controlling the interest rates? It's again something we see again in economics also. But typically, to understand, they generally get into these processes. One being, they persuade the influence on the bank's lending policies. They put some kind of restrictions. They have a one-on-one discussions with the banks in terms of their lending policies. Basically, in terms of what sectors to lend, how much proportions to each of the sectors. So they are trying to control the interest rates based on that particular element. But apart from that, they are also taking in three major, very commonly used measures are these three. One being the discount rate mechanism. In India, we typically call it as repo versus the reverse repo rate mechanism, wherein we talk about, when we use the word discount rate here, the rate at which the banks can borrow from the central bank. Here we call it as repo rate. Banks borrow from the central bank. It plays with that discount rate. Let's say if it is reducing the discount rate, what will happen? More and more banks, or every bank, will borrow more and more money from RBI because the interest rates have actually gone low. They have borrowed heavily from the RBI. So money supply in the market is increasing because they'll borrow more, they lend more. They give more proportion of money in the form of loans. Whatever the money they borrowed from RBI, also they will utilize it for the loans purpose. So money supply is very high in the market compared to the demand, which will reduce the interest rate. So if the interest rates in the market have to go down, if the RBI really thinks that the interest rates in the market have to go down, they can adopt this policy of decreasing the discount rate, decreasing the repo rate. Or if they increase the repo, banks will stop borrowing money from the RBI because the interest rates are much higher, their borrowing rates are higher. They'll stop borrowing from RBI. So money supply will be reduced. So probably the demand will be higher compared to the supply. So the interest rates in the market will typically go up. Borrowers are more, but the money that is available is less. So the interest rates will typically go up. That's the logic. Then the other way in which the central bank plays around with the interest rates is with the open market operations. They buy and sell treasury bills. See, the major securities for the central bank or the treasury bills, treasury bond. These are the securities of the bank itself or of the central bank itself. What they do is they will, if they are selling more and more treasury securities, treasury bills, if they are selling more and more treasury bills, probably the banks are buying them. So what is happening? They are reducing the money supply in the banking system. They are giving treasury bill. They are taking cash from the bank. They are taking cash from the bank. They are giving the bills. They are selling the treasury bills. Because of that, what is happening? Temporarily, for a shorter period, the money supply is getting squeezed. Money supply is reducing in the market. Again, money supply reduces, the interest rate increases. So more and more purchases if the RBI is doing, buyback, more and more buybacks of the treasury bills it is doing, it is giving more and more money into the banking system. More money is sent into the banking system, more supply of money coming up, the interest rates will come down. So these are the tools which the central bank typically uses to play around with the interest rate. If it wants to decrease it, it cannot say I am decreasing the interest rate by this much. The way it does is through one of these operations. The third is the reserve requirement, which we call as CRR, cash reserve ratio. This is a kind of deposit which every bank has to maintain with the central bank. If I am saying the CRR is 8%, on every deposit which the commercial bank is getting, 8% of that deposit amount. So let's say you have deposited $1,000 into the bank. 8% of that, which is $80, have to be deposited with the RBI. So only 920 is available for lending for you. That is what is the typical meaning of the reserve requirement. Mandatorily, that much amount has to be deposited with the RBI. Of course, they will earn interest on that. But that is for any kind of unfortunate things happening later. The banking system, it is just a safety precautionary measure. RBI says they have to be parted with RBI. Not 100% of the money you can't give in loans. It is only 92% or some such kind of numbers is what you can give in the form of loans for every deposit which you have collected. Now, if that reserve requirement is increasing, if the CRR ratio is getting increased, banks are forced to deposit more money with the RBI. So, there is only less money that is available to give loans. Money supply is getting reduced. The interest rates are going up in the market. Right, the reverse again. If the CRR is getting reduced, the banks are left with more money supply, which is again resulting in more supply, less demand, fall in the interest rate. All these kind of things are the various tools which the central bank typically plays with for the loans purpose or for the playing with the interest rate purpose. Then the another concept which we talk of here is the yield curve. We have already discussed the definition of the yield curve. The interest rates for different maturities, if I am plotting them on a curve, I call them as yield curve. So there are various shapes associated with the yield curve. In some cases, this is a most normal kind of a shape. As the maturity period is increasing, the yield curve is also, the interest rates are also increasing. Generally, I deposit for 3 months, my interest rate will be lesser, 6 months, 1 year, 4 years, 5 years, and after a certain point, it will be flatter. That's the typical mechanism for a yield curve. But sometimes, what we observe is the yield curve may be flat, which means whether you deposit for 1 year or 5 years, the interest rates are same. You may get those kind of scenarios. I mean, it's an annualized interest rate. Every year the interest rate is, I mean, even if you see, sometimes even now you observe the scenario with most of the commercial banks, you do a 1 year FD or you do a 5 year FD. The interest rate is same in both of them. So every year you will get the same 9% or 8.5%, whatever they are talking of. It's a, I mean, every year you will get at the rate of 8.5% compounded. It's a flat rate. Right, so whether you deposit for 1 year or 5 years, the interest rates could be same in some cases. That is what is the scenario of a flat yield curve. Sometimes it could be decreasing, which is an inverted yield curve. Probably some time back you could have observed, or even today you will observe this. You do a 1 year, 2 year FDs, the interest rates are higher. You do a 5 year FD, the interest rate will be lesser. Even a couple of months back, and probably even today, probably some of the banks may be having this scenario, right? Where you see 1 year deposit, 2 year deposits, you will get more interest rate. More than that you do, you will get lesser interest rate per year, because there is an expectation that the interest rates will fall drastically in future. So when I am doing it as a package, the average will take me down. So typically when you see, we'll talk about some of the theories, but what we are seeing is, sometimes this, the best way to understand it is go to the bank rates. If you see for different maturities, if the interest rates are growing up, this is a normal yield curve. If you see more or less for a good number of maturities, it looks flat. This is a scenario of a flat yield curve mechanism. Sometimes you may see something like this. Now we are seeing more or less these two scenarios only. And sometimes it could be a hump. You invest only for 3 to 5 years, you will get better returns.